Ethan Blake had lived in his quiet suburban neighborhood for almost a decade. A single man in his 40s, he enjoyed the slower pace of life, spending his evenings walking his golden retriever. Maximum Max was a gentle dog, adored by children on the block and known for wagging his tail at everyone who passed. He barked occasionally, usually when delivery trucks came by, but never for long. To Ethan, Max was more than a pet. He was family. But not everyone shared that sentiment. 2 houses down lived Karen McAllister, a woman infamous in the neighborhood for her short temper and endless complaints. She seemed to thrive on stirring up drama, always ready to find fault with others. Whether it was kids playing too loudly, a lawn not perfectly trimmed, or someone parking slightly outside the lines, Karen made it her business to confront them. And lately, her focus had shifted to Ethan and Max. It started subtly, glares from across the street whenever Max barked, muttered words under her breath as she walked past, and notes left on Ethan's mailbox demanding he control his animal. Ethan brushed it off at first, assuming it was just more of Karen's usual antics. After all, Max wasn't disruptive. But Karen wasn't satisfied. One evening, Ethan returned from work to find an official-looking notice taped to his door. It was a written complaint, submitted to the local animal control office. Karen had accused Max of being a dangerous nuisance, claiming his barking disturbed the peace and frightened neighbors. The accusation was absurd, but it carried weight. If more complaints were filed, Ethan could face fines or worse. He could lose his dog. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He knew Karen had influence. She was relentless and loud, the type who wouldn't stop until she got her way. Sure enough, within a week, a police cruiser rolled up in front of his house. An officer stepped out, explaining that a neighbor had reported a barking disturbance and they were required to investigate. Ethan was stunned. He knew Max barked occasionally, but never excessively. In fact, his dog was one of the quieter pets on the block. Still, Karen had framed her complaint with such exaggeration that it sounded serious. As the officer looked over his yard, Max sat calmly on the porch, wagging his tail. Not a bark, not a growl, just calm obedience. The officer made notes, clearly puzzled, but Ethan could tell this wasn't the end. Karen stood smugly across the street, arms crossed, watching the entire scene unfold like she had already won. But Ethan had a feeling this wasn't over. He knew the truth about Max, and he suspected there was more to Karen's obsession than just barking. What he didn't know yet was that the next police visit would uncover something Karen desperately wanted to keep hidden, something that would turn the tables and leave her humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. The first police visit had left Ethan unsettled but also determined. He knew his golden retriever, Max, wasn't a threat to anyone. The dog rarely barked without reason, and when he did, it was short-lived and harmless. Yet Karen's smug face across the street made one thing clear. She wasn't going to stop until she got rid of him. A week later, the situation escalated. Another squad car appeared, this time with 2 officers. Ethan's heart sank as he saw Karen march toward them, waving her hands dramatically, pointing at his house like she was reporting a crime in progress. She told the officers her version of events, insisting Max barked non-stop day and night, disturbing the neighborhood's peace. But this time, the officers didn't just take her word for it. They were required to follow procedure, so they decided to observe. As they approached Ethan's porch, Max trotted up, tail wagging, ears perked, and tongue hanging out in his usual happy expression. He sat calmly at Ethan's feet, letting out a quiet huff, but not a single bark. The contrast between Karen's dramatic claims and the reality was striking. The officers asked Ethan a series of questions, inspecting the yard and the condition of Max's kennel. Everything was in order. Clean bowls, a shaded resting spot, and no signs of neglect. Max wasn't distressed, malnourished, or aggressive. He was clearly well cared for. The officers took notes but seemed unconvinced by Karen's accusations. Still, Karen wasn't ready to give up. She raised her voice, insisting that Ethan had trained the dog to stay quiet when police were around, and that neighbors were too afraid to speak against him. Her voice grew shrill, and the officers exchanged uneasy looks. It was becoming clear to them that her anger wasn't about a barking dog. It was about control. Then came the turning point. As the officers stood in the yard, listening to Karen rant, a faint sound drifted through the quiet street. It wasn't barking. It was yapping. High-pitched, constant yapping, coming not from Ethan's house, but from Karen's backyard. The officers paused, their attention shifting. The sound grew louder, insistent, almost like an alarm. Curious, one officer stepped closer to the property line. That's when they saw it. Behind Karen's fence, a small dog barked furiously, darting back and forth along the fence line. Its noise was piercing, non-stop, and far louder than anything Max had ever produced. The officer raised an eyebrow. Ethan didn't need to say a word. The evidence was barking right there in plain sight. Karen's face flushed as the officers questioned her about the noise. She stammered, trying to redirect the blame, insisting her dog was only reacting to Maximum. But the truth was undeniable. The supposed nuisance wasn't Ethan's golden retriever at all. It was Karen's own yappy little terrier, the one causing disturbances every evening. The officers made careful notes, their skepticism of Karen growing with each passing moment. Ethan stood quietly, watching the tide shift in his favor. The situation was no longer about his dog. It was about exposing Karen's hypocrisy. By the time the officers left, it was clear they would be filing a very different kind of report. And Karen, though still fuming, had lost her grip on the story she'd built. But Ethan had a feeling she wasn't finished. She had pushed too far to back down quietly, and the final showdown was just around the corner. Word spread quickly after the second police visit. Neighbors who had once stayed silent began whispering about what the officers had discovered, that the constant barking wasn't coming from Ethan's golden retriever at all, but from Karen's own little terrier. The narrative she had carefully crafted began to unravel, and with it, her reputation in the neighborhood. Karen, however, wasn't ready to admit defeat. Within days, she filed yet another complaint, this time alleging that Max was aggressive and posed a danger to children. She claimed he lunged at passers-by and frightened delivery drivers. The accusations were serious, and once again, authorities were required to follow up. But the police, now wary of Karen's exaggerations, took a different approach. They contacted animal control to conduct a thorough welfare and behavior check. On the appointed day, officers arrived with a specialist prepared to observe Max directly. What they found was the exact opposite of Karen's claims. Max greeted the officers with calm enthusiasm, wagging his tail and sitting politely when asked. The animal control officer noted his good health, friendly disposition, and proper care. There were no signs of aggression or mistreatment. In fact, the officer remarked that Max was one of the best-trained dogs he had encountered in the area. Then, the officers turned their attention to Karen's property. With multiple complaints now filed in both directions, they were obligated to check on her dog as well. That was when the truth came spilling out. Karen's terrier was not only the source of the excessive barking, but was also being left outside for long stretches without proper shade or water. Its non-stop barking was a direct result of stress and neglect. The discovery changed everything. Karen, who had tried to weaponize the system against Ethan, now found herself under investigation. She was cited for failure to control her dog, warned about neglect, and placed under monitoring by animal control. The very authorities she had summoned against a neighbor were now documenting her as the problem. The humiliation was swift. Neighbors who had once tolerated her outbursts now openly criticized her behavior. Some even admitted they had been bothered by her terriers yapping for years, but had been too intimidated to speak up. With the truth exposed, Karen's credibility evaporated. As for Ethan, the ordeal ended with relief and vindication. The reports cleared Max of all wrongdoing, and the police assured him that no further complaints will be taken seriously without hard evidence. He was free from the constant harassment, and his bond with his loyal golden retriever remained unshaken. Karen, on the other hand, was left with the consequences of her actions. Her attempt to control the neighborhood had backfired spectacularly, and her once powerful voice had turned into little more than background noise, just like the incessant barking she had tried so hard to blame on someone else. In the end, her regret came not just from being caught, but from realizing that her own cruelty had built the cage she now found herself in. And for Ethan, the quiet evenings with Max by his side had never felt so peaceful.